Hi, folks. Today we're talking about family violence and abuse. With this chapter, we begin with several themes. First is social isolation, that there are significant expectations of privacy concerning families in our society. That, combined with the personal painful experiences of abuse, may shroud survivors in silence. They may feel like they can't talk about the experiences that they've had within their families, that this would be breaking social norms to do so. Also, feminism, that our cultural conceptions of family violence and abuse are rooted in the sociology of women in society and the unique definitions of femininity each generation has concerning women, children, and families. Also, a theme is that family is an institution, that familial relationships are examples of social structure, of these stable interactions that impact our individual efforts. However, there's great variety from one context to the next, so things are subjective from one family to another. Also, family is mediated by, it's influenced by the state, and it's influenced by the market. Much of what occurs, if you will, within families is related to government and related to market forces, such as, for instance, the availability of care work intended to reduce family conflict, or if we're looking at attorneys who specialize in divorces involving domestic violence. Speaking more about violence, we now need to define and categorize family violence. And so, by definition, family violence refers to several kinds of harm caused by family members against each other. And so, that involves number one, intimate partners with respect to spouses, cohabiting partners, romantic and sexual partners, be they current or former, children and dependents. And so, this involves biological children, stepchildren, foster children, or adopted children. And we're also looking at elder abuse. This involves older family members, such as parents and in laws. In fact, commonly the abuse of older family members takes on two forms, one known as coercive control, often involving threats or controlling resources, or expressive forms of aggression using strong emotional outbursts meant to intimidate the family member as well. When it comes to children, we have to look at federal government definitions. And so, per the federal government, if you will, defining child abuse is defined as the act or failure to act on the part of the parent or caretaker that results in or puts children at imminent risk for physical or emotional harm, sexual abuse, and exploitation. While physical abuse is much more easily and readily observable and less subject to debate, neglect is much more difficult, much harder to establish what ultimately constitutes neglect from one family or one household to another. Nevertheless, there are indeed patterns of both abuse and neglect within families. Number one pattern that we know for certain is that overwhelmingly parents and other caregivers are the typical perpetrators. In fact, parents are 90% of child abuse perpetrators, with the remaining 10% attributed to other family members or romantic partners of the parents. There are significant amounts of missing data, however, with respect, if you will, to examining patterns of abuse and neglect within family. Social science research demonstrates this. For instance, in terms of survey research, 28% of young adults reported experiencing physical assault as children versus the actual official government rates of 12.5%. So, quite frankly, the data indicate that there's still work to do, if you will, in trying to reduce this discrepancy as much as possible. Children who are most likely, if you will, to be victimized, if you will, fits these, if you will, characteristics or patterns. Those children who live with mentally ill parents who have poor impulse control, low self-esteem, as well as a history of violence themselves. Children who live in homes where violence occurs between adults, children in poor families, or those who live in poor neighborhoods. And so we're looking really at deprivation and stress within the family, as well as deprivation and stress within the neighborhood. Also, children who come from families with weak social support networks. And so social support, we know and understand, is a way to alleviate parental stress. And the lack of presence of that social support does not allow for stress to be mitigated, and that becomes the context, if you will, for which children are victimized. Going on, we also can talk about intimate partner violence. This refers to violence between partners who are or were involved in a sexual or romantic relationship. This involves or includes threats and acts of violence, rape, as well as stalking. Consistent with abuse and child abuse, I should say, intimate partner violence is underreported. There are some patterns, unique patterns, if you will, to how intimate partner violence is experienced. The first of these, if you will, is known as common couple violence. So it's the most common form, if you will, just looking at, if you will, violence occurring back and forth within the relationship. Also, intimate terrorism. So this involves a sustained campaign for violence and control by one partner over another. And violent resistance is also another pattern where one partner lashes out in response to their own victimization. Nevertheless, men are much more likely to perpetuate long term serious violence within relationships. Those at greatest risk include number one, women who are women are at much greater risk, I should say, of rape and violence, especially young women. Number two, women in families that are experiencing financial hardship. Again, we're looking at multiple stressors, that being the biggest one that definitely contributes to this occurring within families. Also, relationships involving drug and alcohol abuse. And so, again, that tends to ratchet up the stressors within the household and within the family. Women who are experiencing or who are within cohabiting relationships, as well as women who have recently left their abusers. Going on, we also need to look more clearly at power and sexual assault and sexual coercion, if you will, within families and within households as well. And so, by definition, we can talk about first rape, forced penetrative sexual behavior with an individual without that individual's consent. We're also looking beyond rape at sexual assault. This refers to unwanted penetration or touch by force or threat of force without consent, as well as incest, sex between close relatives, primarily involving parents, children, siblings, if you will, or other relatives. The incidence or the amount that we can observe within our society, estimates, if you will, state that 18% of adult women in this country have been raped at some point in their lives, and another 3% have been victims of an attempted rape. For men, we're looking at 3% of men having been victimized by an attempted or a completed rape during their lifetimes. There are a number of theories that have been used, that have been offered or postulated, if you will, to explain how and why rape occurs. The first of these is known as a psychopathological theory or the psychopathological theories. And so basically, what these say is that there's something wrong with rapists. They are sick, or they are diseased, or they are intoxicated, and that's what motivates them to rape. That if we identify and treat the sick, that we won't have rape anymore. This has had some support, but not very much, because overwhelmingly research does not confirm that disease or intoxication is a consistent cause of rape. Another body of theories that have been used and offered to explain why rape and incest and sexual assault occur is known as the victim precipitation theory, or the derogation of the victim. So this is a way that explains how survivors somehow made themselves vulnerable to the rape or the assault experience, wherein the burden of proof is shifted from the perpetrator to the survivor. Again, not any real data, not any real meat here that would support or back up this kind of theorizing. What we have that offers the best, most ardent, and most effective explanations, if you will, would involve feminist and sociological approaches. So, feminist theory argues that rape and the threat of rape are used to keep women in their place, that the fear of rape keeps many women in traditional sex roles, influencing them to reach out for men for protection. And very much consistent with this way of thinking is sociological theory that determines that rape is an expression of power differences within society between both sexes. As women have gained socially, educationally, and occupationally, rates of rape have increased. Male rape of women is designed to balance the power in the direction of men. Right? All right. Going on, there is also data concerning male victims of rape and male rape victims. Each year, more than 14,000 men are victims of rape or an attempted rape. However, research shows that male rape is far more underreported than female rape. Men are indeed raped by women. There are mythologies that suggest that men can't be raped by women, and so that contributes to the low reporting of this very crime. The majority of male rapes by women involve psychological or pressured contact. So a guy may be told by a woman, well, you better do this, or I'll tell everyone that you wouldn't, or you couldn't get it up, I should say. So this is also an expression of power, also a show of strength, and in the case of men raped by other men, it's definitely a show of strength and definitely a show of masculinity. So men who are raped by men often question their sexual orientation, and they feel that the rape may make them less of a real man.